I found this old school desk and I wanted to give it a new look with a fun color. Painting is a really easy way to refresh something like this and on a budget. I'm painting indoors, which you don't always have to paint indoors. If you've got a nice warm day, you can do it outside. That's probably preferable, but it's cold here now and that's gonna affect my dry time. So indoors it is. So I prepped my area to make sure that I don't get paint or cleaning solution on anything that I care about. I've got a drop cloth down. That's gonna catch the paint, but it could seep through. So I did the extra step of putting plastic underneath the drop cloth and I taped it in place so it doesn't become a tripping hazard. The first thing I want to do is clean this guy because I have no idea what its former life was like, but if it was a desk for kids, you know it's got some goo on it. Now you can use TSP or TSP substitute. TSP, trisodium phosphate, is a really strong cleaning agent and degreaser. And that's what we used to use, but it's very toxic and not friendly on the environment and a little bit overkill for this project. TSP substitute is more readily available, easier on your lungs, easier to clean up, easier on the environment, and in general, just better. I've mixed up the solution in a bucket here. It's just a, read the label kind of deal. TSP substitute and water. You're gonna wanna put on some safety gear because you don't want it getting in your eyeballs or on your skin. And then I'm just gonna dip in my rag, get it saturated with the TSP substitute, and give this guy a very solid once over. We're gonna be sanding after this. So this is also a good time for your hands to get to know the piece. So you'll know you're done when you've given the whole piece a good thorough once over and you don't feel any more sticky areas. Now the nice thing about TSP substitute is it doesn't require any rinsing. We do need to let this whole piece dry though, because the next thing we're gonna do is sand and we want the piece to be dry for sanding. You can't rush past the sanding. Sanding is the key to this whole project and I'm gonna show you why. But first let me give you the lowdown on sandpaper. So sandpaper comes in grits. The lower the number, the coarser the grit. The coarser the grit, the more aggressive the bite. So that's for removing material. The finer the grit, that's more like polishing and buffing. For this piece right now, we don't want to sand off the entire existing finish and we don't want to polish it smooth. What we want to do is use a medium grit, like a 180, to scuff up the entire surface. That's so it has some tooth and the primer will be able to adhere to the surface. Okay, this whole piece is good and scuffed up and ready for primer. Now I cleaned the area, I vacuumed up all the dust. Another thing I'm gonna do before we put on the primer is use a tack cloth to get up all the fine particles that are still clinging to this piece. A tack cloth is a waxed piece of cheesecloth. It's kind of like a lint roller for your workpiece. You wanna kind of scrumple it up and just drag it lightly over your surface and it will pick up any remaining dust. One of the reasons it's important to remove all the dust is so that you get really good adhesion with your primer. It's time to prime. So we could use a water-based primer or an oil-based primer. We're using a water-based one for the simple fact that it's less toxic, it dries faster, you don't need ventilation, and it's easy cleanup. You never want to dip your tool into your main pot of paint because then you could contaminate your main source. After I'm done priming this, it's gonna need to stand somewhere to dry. This is a pretty good posture for it to dry, which means I'm gonna start on the underside so that I can finish up with it upright. I'm gonna load up my roller and dip my brush. The goal here is good solid coverage, but not too thick of a coat. We're gonna be sanding once this is dry. And the reason we're gonna sand the primer is because we wanna level off all of the brush marks and roller marks. And that is what's gonna make for a really smooth finish coat. primer is dry, it's time to sand again. We want to level off all of these roller textures and brush marks. That's what's going to give us a really smooth finish. We're using 220 grit, that's a fine grit sandpaper, because we really just want to level off the brush marks. We do not want to sand through the primer. You'll be able to feel when everything smooths out, and your hands will be really dusty. That's perfect, that's what you want. When you've gone over the whole thing, gotten all the brush marks out, and everything is really smooth, then we'll do the dust removal again, because the last thing we want is to get particles in our finish when we spent all this time making everything so smooth. This is the fun part. This is where we get to put color on the piece. I chose this really fun teal. It's a water-based latex paint. This roller is a high-density foam roller. I tend to have the best results with these. And then I have a brush for all the areas where the roller can't reach. I'm gonna start in this well here because I know the roller won't reach in there. So pretty, I'm so happy with this, it's perfect. Okay, load your roller up, but don't make it sloppy with paint. And then roll it on so it's wet enough, but you want good coverage because you don't want to have to over-roll. You don't want to spread your paint out too thin and have it dry. We call it working with a wet edge. So now that I've got this area nice and covered, I'm just gonna go back with my brush really quickly and do a light back and forth to clean up those roller marks. And before that gets a chance to dry, work from the wet area to the dry area. Doing slight diagonals with your roller will help you not get the straight roller marks. As soon as you feel the paint starting to stick, stop rolling. It's only gonna get worse from there. Okay, so with a slightly wet brush, I'm gonna go back over very lightly. Earlier I flipped this upside down. I don't wanna do that with this finish coat because I want gravity to level this off the whole time I'm working. So I'm gonna work in a direction that has all the drips flowing downward and I can catch them as I go. If you do catch yourself with a drip, get it as fast as you can. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna give it a couple of hours to dry and then put it in its new home. I think it will work really well as an end table or even a nightstand because it's got this shelf and opening in here for books or magazines.